for violent criminals. It's the same bill, unfortunately, that was introduced as Bill C-22 in the last Parliament before the Prime Minister called his completely unnecessary $630 million pandemic election. For the second consecutive election, the Liberal Party received fewer votes than the Conservative Party. The voters did not give the Prime Minister a mandate to experiment with the criminal justice system or any other ideological experiment on how Canadians govern themselves. The evidence on how opportunistic the election was is the length of time it took for the government to recall Parliament to avoid democratic scrutiny of its failed policies. Parliamentary committees were only formed just before we were shut down for the Christmas season. So much for the sense of urgency in calling an election. Right. During the election, the Prime Minister and his party used vulnerable Canadians, marginalized Canadians, the same Canadians that they state suffer from systemic racism, from a justice system they've been running for the last 6.5 years, as cover for the real objective of the bill, which is to pursue a liberal ideological agenda of going soft on criminals. Canadians heard endless political rhetoric from the Liberals about how firearms pose a significant threat to public safety and the security of our communities. As had been the Liberal practice in all 8 elections I've successfully run in, the Prime Minister, on cue, attacked the one group that's statistically proven to be the most law-abiding: Canadians who own and responsibly use a firearm. That's right. Then within 3.5 weeks of the House reconvening following the election, what does the Liberal Party do? It introduces legislation not to get tough on firearms offences, but to help criminals who illegally use firearms and put the lives of people at risk. Okay. Bill C-5 will allow criminals to stay out of jail and in the community. And it's only common sense when the court system puts dangerous offenders back out on the street rather than putting them behind bars where they belong, there's going to be a greater risk that they're going to commit other offenses. True. It's known there's a high proportion of repeat offenders in Canada's justice system, criminal justice system, and C-5 will contribute to the perpetuating of the backlog in the courts. There's been silence from the Justice Minister that C-5 will lead to our justice system being overwhelmed by repeat offenders, basically exacerbating the situation in our trial system, which is already heavily backlogged with cases. This backlog led to the infamous Jordan decision. Canadians would be interested in hearing how C-5 will increase the safety and security of individuals as applied to the Jordan decision. The Prime Minister and his Liberal Socialist Alliance want Canadians to believe that C-5 is only about reducing minimum sentences for simple drug possession, but that's not so. Most Canadians would be alarmed to learn this legislation is aimed at eliminating mandatory prison time for criminals who prey on our communities and victimize the vulnerable. Bill C-5 puts the rights of criminals first and the rights of victims last. It endangers public safety while doing nothing to help marginalized and vulnerable Canadians. Bill C-5 proposes to eliminate mandatory prison time, not for petty crimes, but for crimes like drug trafficking and acts of violence. It would even allow violent criminals to serve their sentences on house arrest and not in prison, putting communities at continued risk. Let's now look at the elimination of mandatory prison time for firearm offenses. In contrast to the Liberal election spin that demonizes lawful firearms owners to placate the anti-firearms lobby on being so-called tough on gun violence, there is the complete hypocrisy of Bill C-5. It will eliminate mandatory minimum sentences related to gun crimes, including serious gun crimes such as robbery with a firearm, extortion with a firearm, using a firearm in the commission of offense, discharging a firearm with intent, which is criminal code language for shooting at someone, illegal possession of a prohibited or restricted firearm, importing an unauthorized firearm, discharging a firearm recklessly, and other firearms offenses such as weapons trafficking, importing, and exporting, knowing the firearm is unauthorized, possession of a prohibited or restricted firearm with ammunition, possession of a weapon obtained by the commission of an offense in Canada, and possession for the purpose of weapon trafficking. What Bill C-5 does, which is baked into every piece of legislation brought forward by the Liberal Party, is it blames the victim. Conservatives believe that criminals should be held responsible for their actions. Victims should have just as many rights as our criminal justice system as criminals do. And Canadians know from the famous Kokanee grope incident, with comments like, well, women can perceive things differently, this fake feminist prime minister likes to blame the victim. Violence against women continues to be a fact of life in Canada. On average, in Canada, one woman is killed by her intimate partner every 5 days. On September 22nd, 2015, Carol Culleton, Natalie Warmerdam, and Anastasia Kuzyk were murdered by someone known to each of them. The man finally convicted of their murders had a long criminal history, including charges involving 2 of the 3 women. Happening in my Eastern Ontario riding during the middle of the 2015 federal election campaign, their violent deaths scarcely caused a ripple in a too cynical national media, leaving the families and the rural Ontario community these women were members of to grieve in silence. I can assure the Prime Minister I've not forgotten what happened to these women. The system failed these women. Talk is cheap when I hear members of the government say, scrap the progress that our Conservative governments made in reforming the criminal justice system. But I invite the Minister of Justice to spend some time listening to the families of these murdered women. Changing our laws to blame the victim by giving the criminal a pat on the head is just plain wrong. Let's not allow Carol, Natalie, Anastasia, and all the other women who've been murdered by their intimate partners to have died in vain. During this debate, Canadians have heard the Liberal Party confirm in their own statements, while omitting the fact that they've been the government for the last 6.5 years, they have provided over a justice system plagued by systemic racism. The criminal code is supposed to apply equally to everyone in Canada. And if the government was actually serious about ending systemic racism, it would be tabling a plan to build communities instead of resorting to blame the victim legislation. Sam Goldstein, criminal lawyer and former Crown attorney, recently stated in an Ottawa publication that, quote, mandatory minimum sentences act as general deterrents to crime, and argued that if there are problems with the marginalized communities, like social dislocation and poverty, fixing those makes more sense than adjusting a criminal law. I don't like it when politicians try to interfere in criminal justice for their own social justice ends, because ultimately it doesn't serve people well, said Goldstein. He expanded further, noting that moves towards support for therapeutic drug courts makes more sense than decriminalization. Mandatory minimum sentences simply protect society at every level. They deter crime, they make society safer, they do not violate the Constitution. Remember, the criminal code is supposed to apply equally to everyone in Canada. Mandatory minimum sentences do not discriminate against those who are marginalized. And if they do intrude on judicial independence, it is to restrain activist judges who forget their role is to uphold the law, not to rewrite it in every case.
That's right.
Don't tinker with amendments to the law that will make people feel less safe in their own homes. The public has a right to feel safe, and that's no longer possible for Carol, Natalie, and Anastasia, whom our criminal justice system failed. In closing, Bill C-5 puts the rights of criminals first and the rights of victims last. It endangers public safety while doing nothing to help marginalized and vulnerable Canadians. This bill needs to be defeated.
Hear, hear.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Brampton North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm trying to gather my